Hi, guys. My name's Liz, and I'm here to talk about a product-led approach to sales, or really the role of sales in a product-led company. So as I say product-led company, I want to make sure everybody knows what I mean by that. Have you guys heard the term a product qualified lead? A little raise of hands, some nodding, okay, good. At OpenView, we've really seen this kind of proliferation of product-led companies over the last couple of years, and the term product qualified or product-led has been coming up more and more. And so there's a couple of common things we tend to see in those companies. It's generally user-driven adoption, really easy to use, easy to install, very limited implementation, network effect, viral by nature. Those are sort of some of the things I think of. So the companies that come to mind, I'm sure you guys have a few in mind, but Slack, Atlassian, Dropbox are some of the obvious ones, right? So there's a few in the OpenView portfolio as well. I work for a venture capital firm based in Boston. We invest in expansion stage software companies. A few at the top left here, you may have heard of Calendly, Expensify, Datadog, Deputy, all companies that are employing that product first vision for sales. And what I'm here to talk about is really where sales comes into play. So over the last couple of years, I've seen literally thousands of companies, talked to hundreds of founders, and we've really swung in the direction of looking for automation and product-first approach. So you've built this awesome product, everybody's using it, but what I tend to hear from people is we've aligned our culture around being customer-centric, and we want to move away from the stigma of having an enterprise product that takes months to sell, that goes through procurement cycles, that's probably months away from implementation even when you buy. And we're really focused on providing an amazing customer experience, and we've built our entire company around that. And what I don't want is this boiler room culture. And I get that, but I still think there's a place for sales. And if I look back, 10 years, you had this really heavy inside sales model just starting to grow. You think about like a Salesforce, predictable revenue, even HubSpot was just mentioned, obviously an inbound model, but heavy on the sales team. I'll take some blame as the VC community. I think we've pushed everybody, and this pendulum has swung in the other direction, and we're starting to see more people talk about automating out the human as much as possible. And what I want to say is, whether or not you call it sales, there is still a team dedicated at your company to acquiring and accelerating new revenue. So at a product-led company, that might take a different name. It might look like customer experience or customer success or customer support. It is a very customer-centric model, but it's still about acquiring and accelerating new revenue. So I think there are very few companies that actually can employ a product-only go-to-market model, and it's about figuring out where you can layer in that human effort and how you most effectively use your people to sell. So here, what I want to go through is really the ways that sales changes and how the common approach to sales will change when you have a product-led approach. So there's a couple of things that come to mind for me. I'm going to go through the who, when, and how. But I think a lot of the tactics that we've used for both enterprise and inside selling will still apply. So who? In attracting the right customers, you're probably generating hundreds, maybe thousands of leads at a time. Often those are coming in through your product. But the key is to make sure that you're getting to the right people at the right time with the right message. So the first thing you're going to do is figure out who your ideal customer profile is, making sure that you're getting really narrow in that target market segment. So when I work with a new company at OpenView now, one of the first things we do is customer segmentation work. And what we do is we dig into the data first. We're looking at what it costs to acquire a customer, what the win rate is, what the length of time. And we're trying to come up with what are the couple of key segments that you should be selling to, and what are the commonalities between those. And what I want that sales leader or the founder to be able to answer at the end is, who are my best customers, why, and how did I get them? Because once you know that, it's easier to go get more of them. And that's where you want to layer in any sales effort that's actually occurring. So assuming that product can be your lead gen tool, I think there's a lot of things we can learn from some of the freemium models that are out there. I think freemium is sort of on its way out. If you look at how frequently it's even Googled in the last few years, there's this massive decline. Instead, people are putting together free trials or creating gating in the product to have automatic upgrades rather than just a free for life model. But if your product is out there and you give people access to your product, there's then a lot of really good leading indicators for you. You can start to look at what actually makes somebody adopt your product. Maybe they need to make a timesheet or an expense report. Maybe they need to make their first project plan, add another user. You want to know what the commonalities are that make somebody ultimately convert so you can drive that behavior back. And then finally, let them come to you. This is probably pretty obvious, but if you're generating tons of leads and they're not all in your target segment, you want to make sure you're applying pressure to the right group and that you're actually making sure that you're reaching the right people. So if you've identified that ideal customer profile, have your sales team or your customer experience team or your customer success team actually employing tactics to engage the people that are already doing some form of hand raising. So maybe that is that they're actually reaching out to your support team with a question. Maybe it's they're taking some activity that shows engagement with your product. But it's really key that you're measuring that and you're highlighting those individuals and popping them to the top of any queue. I think somebody who's done that really well. Steve Johnson was the CRO at Hootsuite as it grew to 100 million and then is now at Vidyard. This is a quote he actually said just a couple weeks ago. He said, "Buying is changing. People are getting much, much more comfortable buying on their own and don't just want to talk to somebody. Just give them the product." And his whole mantra was about getting the product in the hands of the individual user so he could see how they were using it and start to take off that top layer and look at who was using it best and identify who those great customers were. So on the when front, I think the common model is that early and often you look at people who are coming into the top of your funnel who are starting to engage and you start to swarm them. You have your sales rep, your BDR, or maybe you have somebody on your executive team reaching out and trying to connect at all levels of the company. It doesn't really work in this model. It's too time intensive, it's too cost intensive. So instead, you start to use a more reactive model of support. But the key is to make sure that they have an exceptional customer experience from the first time they touch your website to any engagement they have with the company, and that you have SLAs in place, that your speed of response and your accuracy of response are on point. So I'm not going to give a software example of here, but I heard about this last week and I thought it was really funny. This is like from a couple of years ago, so I'm sorry it's blurry here. But somebody tweeted, they said, "Congrats to American Air and US Airways on creating the largest, shittiest airline in the world." And American Air responded an hour later and said, "Thanks for your support. We look forward to a bright future." So they just have this like automated thing going out, right? Like anytime somebody tweets them, they're responding. Speed can be a problem for you. So when you have all these different channels where somebody can reach out to you, people can be on Twitter, they can be on Messenger, they can be in Facebook, on your website, making sure that you're thinking through how all of those channels can impact the customer experience, and that you have people that are both thinking about speed, but balancing that with quality and actually resolving the issue is really key. Next is really around conversion. So on the conversion front, I talked a little bit about sort of that free trial model and looking for leading indicators. I think the key then is to figure out what are the touch points that will actually allow you to increase that conversion. And it may be that they're one-to-one, it may be that they're one-to-many. It could be in-app messaging. It could be small touch points through email throughout the course of that trial. It could be offering a support call. It could be that you actually have a one-on-one phone call coming from a sales rep at different points depending on the engagement level they've shown. So each of the ways, there's tons of different tactics you could use here, but I think the key is to be thinking about your holistic funnel and how to get more out of the people that you're already attracting and constantly experimenting with that. Then I have the word retention up here, but in my mind, it's really more about adoption. I think in a product-led model, if you're waiting until you see signs of churn, it's too late. Generally, these models are on a monthly basis, maybe some are annual, but you have the first few hours, days, maybe weeks to capture your audience and start to create that virality within the company so that you can take on an entire department or extend beyond the reach of that department. So adoption, again, I think there's a lot of different ways that you can go about that. It doesn't need to be a one-to-one implementation that takes many weeks, but maybe you find that if you take that first step for them, it just pushes them over the edge. That there's one thing that all of your successful customers did. Maybe it's importing some piece of data that you can make easier for them. Maybe it's a quick training video. Maybe it is a phone call with your support team. Figuring out what those things look like. Webinars. I've done a lot of webinars too where people will say once a week we get you on here, but they know that if they get somebody on versus the ones they don't, their drop-off rate is completely different. Thinking through what that adoption up front looks like, not just looking at churn after the fact. So Bill Masitis was here earlier this week. I don't know if anybody saw him speak. He's the former CMO and CRO at Slack, and I had a chance to interview him just a couple weeks ago. And again, like I said, this is a really common thing we're talking about now. But he said that he has a new goal for his team. It's not just did they buy our product, but did they recommend it? And I think that's really core to what you're thinking about on that adoption and retention standpoint, making sure that individuals, your team, are reaching out to people with the goal of providing such a great experience that they become your promoters. All right, and finally on the how front. So I'm going to go with the less is more mantra here. I think that we have a tendency to overcomplicate the sale. And as soon as we start to add in that human effort to a product-led approach, it suddenly becomes so much more difficult than it needs to be. I was working with a company recently, and they started hiring sort of like an inside rep, and just their top customers that had more than a certain number of employees. If they were in a trial, they would get a call and they would be offered a demo, and it seemed like a really good idea. And in my head, I'm thinking, okay, this is probably like a 10 or 15 minute call. You answer a few questions, you let them go back to what they were otherwise doing in the product. So I went in to shadow one, and they were spending an hour to an hour and 15 minutes doing like a feature tour. And you could hear like the pain in the end of the other person's voice. They were just like, I didn't need this. I had 2 questions, and you took me down this whole path. And so making sure that they were focusing on the value, answering just a few questions and moving them a step further in the process rather than trying to go all the way through that product, it took some change, right? It was change management in their behavior. So the couple of things I'll say here, 1, employing that bottoms-up approach, making sure that you're arming your power users and your end users with the business case to help spread the product. And then secondly, the comp plan. If you don't want your team to act like an enterprise team or an inside sales group, you can't measure them on those metrics. So even if your comp isn't tied to it, you can't be tracking the amount of talk time or the number of dials they make or the number of people they talk to. You want to make sure you're actually influencing the right behavior that you're looking for, which probably means talking far more about adoption rates, churn, NPS, CSAT, and making sure that your team's metrics and comp are actually aligned around those things. So I'll tout a company in our portfolio now. David Barrett, the founder of Expensify. Does anybody know Expensify in the room? Used it? A few people? Company's motto is great. Expense reports that don't suck. That's it. He has never spent money on marketing or sales. His plan was to build an expense product that was so great that people just wanted to use it, and they would bring it to their controller or to their VP of finance and say, we need a new tool, like the Concur we have or whatever else isn't working, it's clunky, we can be smarter about this. That's his goal. People sign up, use it, and tell their friends, and that viral nature is actually taking effect. Very cool. All right, so the last thing I will end with here before I take some questions. At some point, as you grow, you're gonna start creating inbound interest that's maybe bigger than you have in the past. And I think there is this innate need to maintain what has worked in the past and to try to treat those customers the same. And so don't assume that it will work. Be okay that if someday you need to hire an enterprise sales rep or 10 or 20, embrace it, do it, move forward, but don't let that disrupt your core business. It's okay to segment those customers and actually treat them differently and build the 2 different business case models. Steve Johnson, who I was talking about earlier at Vidyard, actually has a really good example of that, where they have a true SMB market that looks really different than the sales process they're employing at the enterprise space. So with that, I will take some questions, and I'll just call out here if you want to take a look. We've been spending a lot of time in this product-led growth space as a team at OpenView. A lot of people who spend a lot more time on product and marketing and other areas of expertise have also kind of weighed in with their thoughts, so take a look if you're interested. Can we flip over to questions? Do I have to do something? All right, so if we got Slido there, tell me anything that I can answer for you guys. Give it a minute. All right, I think we're good. Thank you so much.